Lecture 4, Study.
Welcome back to Lecture 4 of the Introduction to Judaism course, which is on Talmud Torah, or studying, learning. Actually, the definition of Talmud Torah is very cute, because Talmud means learning or studying, and Torah means teaching. So Talmud Torah can be translated as learning, teaching, right? But it's the idea of study. And it turns out to be the central commandment or mitzvah in Rabbinic Judaism. We already have the idea within the Torah itself, within the Pentateuch itself, of speaking about these words day and night. That is familiar to some Jews because it is enshrined in the liturgy of the Shema. Shema comes from the first word of Deuteronomy 6:4. Hear, O Israel. Shema means listen up, hearken. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, and it should probably be translated as property. It's usually translated as might. And you shall speak about these words, probably referring back to the Decalogue that had been given in Deuteronomy chapter 5. But rabbinic tradition accepts those words as all of the Torah. You shall speak about those words all the time, when you're walking along the way, when you're sitting in your house, when you lie down at night, when you rise up in the morning. So the idea of speaking of the words, the going over, the repetition of God's words or God's ways, God's mitzvot, the plural of mitzvah, God's commandments, is already enshrined in the Torah itself, at least according to the rabbinic rereading of the Torah. We also have Psalm 119, which is a paean to the idea of loving Torah, of talking about Torah all the time. What do we have here from verse 97 to 98? Psalm 119 is a very long psalm. Oh, how I love your teaching. Teaching is Torah. Oh, how I love your teaching. It is my study all day long. Your commandments make me wiser than my enemies. They always stand by me. They always stand by me. So all of Psalm 119, all 100 and however many verses it is, it's actually an acrostic. The Hebrew alphabet has 22 letters, and it repeats that Hebrew alphabet 4 times, going A through Z or Aleph through Taf, 4 times, and so you've got this big long psalm that's all about how wonderful the Torah is. So even within the Tanakh itself, the Torah and studying the Torah, relating to it as a source of wisdom and commandments to guide your life, are promoted. By the time we get to the rabbinic period, after the temple has been destroyed, the value of Talmud Torah shoots up because so many other values sort of drop off the radar screen, because once the temple has been destroyed, all of those priestly functions are no longer obtainable, and anything that you would do in the temple you can no longer do. So the value of studying the Torah as a way of communing with God and knowing the divine mind is characteristic of Rabbinic Judaism. One of the statements that gets at the centrality of Talmud Torah is by Shimon the Righteous, Shimon HaTzadik, who says that the world stands on 3 things: on Torah, on worship, and on acts of loving kindness. So I took that statement by Shimon the Righteous for this lecture and our next 2 lectures. So this lecture is dedicated to the world standing on Torah. Now, does he mean that the world really stands, that the world is resting on a pillar, a tripod, and that one leg of that tripod is Torah? And if people were to stop studying Torah, then the world could no longer be held up or maintained? I think there's a sense in which he does mean that. We have a rabbinic statement that says, without Torah, the world would sink back into the watery chaos of the beginning. The watery chaos of the beginning. Right? The first verses of the Hebrew Bible in the King James translation say something like, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth looked like this. The earth was formless and void. The idea, the picture that you get from the King James translation is when the curtain goes up on the stage of creation, the stage is black. There's nothing there. Boom. God creates heaven and earth are in this inchoate, incipient form, and God orders the creation. God takes chaos and moves it towards cosmos, chaos to order. But the Hebrew suggests something else, and so the New Jewish Publication Society translation of the Tanakh has as follows: when God began creating the heavens and the earth was formless and void. What's the difference? When the curtain goes up on the screen of creation there, on the stage of creation, what you're seeing is this kind of watery, chaotic swirl already there, and God takes those elements that existed before the curtain went up and orders that. So what the rabbis here are saying, and the rabbis were okay with that idea, that God took pre-existent matter and made a kind of divine order out of that pre-existent chaos. By the time we get to the Middle Ages, they have problems with that idea. But the rabbis in the rabbinic period, from the 1st century to the 7th century, say, they were fine with that idea. But what they say about Torah is that without Torah, the world would revert to this watery, primeval chaos. I think the idea there is actually fairly easy to understand, namely that without laws to govern our society, we would revert to a state of nature that the rabbis understand, much like Thomas Hobbes understood, was nasty, short, and brutish, and that things would become complete anarchy and complete chaos without the laws that the Torah gives us to organize our societies and our lives. It's more, though, Talmud Torah, than about ordering your life. It's also where to find God, God's exclusive address. In the post-temple reality, divine access is now available only through the study of God's Word. For my undergraduates, I do a little skit called theography. Theography, my wife doesn't like the term because she thinks it should be about theology and writing, graphy, but the way I'm using the term theography, it's about theology and geography. So the question is where to find God. If you think about the early books of the Hebrew Bible in this theographic skit that I'm going to now lay out for you, the way you find God, the place you find God is in nature, walking through the Garden of Eden in the breezy time of the day, and in history. God appears to Abraham, God appears to Moses in the form of a burning bush, right? That's where you encounter God in this world, in nature or in history. God leads the Israelites out of Egypt with a strong hand. By the time we get into the middle books of the Hebrew Bible, God's presence is accessed no longer in nature and history, but in the tabernacle, which then becomes the prototype for the temple in Jerusalem. So once we get into the land of Israel, the place that you go to access the divine presence is the temple in Jerusalem. Well, once the temple is destroyed, where do you go to get God's presence? How do you access that? So the rabbinic answer was the closest thing to God that we have is God's will as represented in the Torah, in the 5 books of Moses. And what is so nice about the Torah is that God can be accessed through the Torah 24/7. It's not like you need a priestly intermediary anymore at the temple to get to God. Anybody in this kind of democratization of piety, anyone can access the Torah. Moreover, it doesn't matter who your mama was or who your daddy was. In order to be a priest, you had to be of the priestly line, which was one of Aaron's grandsons, okay? Phineas or Pinchas. In order to have that position of power and prestige and influence in the community, it was pedigree. But now anyone in this move toward democratization who has the intellectual power of mastering the traditions of the Torah, they can establish themselves as the pious, as the leaders, and also as the ones that represent a kind of purity, both in terms of ritual purity that the Pharisees emphasized and moral purity that the rabbis emphasized. So we see this democratization process of the leadership in the Jewish community as a result of the destruction of the temple, right? Some Jews say Thank God the Romans destroyed the temple, because it allowed rabbinic Judaism to emerge in ways that are much more in keeping with modern Jewish sensibilities of a more egalitarian access. Women could study Torah, but we don't have too many, we have a few, but we don't have too many examples in rabbinic history of women actually being literate at all or mastering the traditions of the Torah. One statement by the rabbis in the Talmud is as follows. Rabbi Chia Bar Ami, the son of Ami, said, "Since the day the temple was destroyed, the Holy One has in this world nothing other than the 4 cubits or arm lengths of the halakha, of Jewish law." In other words, you access God, now that the temple is destroyed, you access God through the halakha. I view this statement personally as sad, that the way you access God is through Jewish law. And there were people that disagreed with that statement when it was said in the rabbinic period, and there were movements in Judaism in the Middle Ages and in the early modern period and in the modern period that were dedicated to finding God outside of the halakha as well. But we see that one prominent posture of how to get to God is through not just Torah and all the stories that we have, but the halakha, through Jewish law. So Talmud Torah is a function of intelligence and discipline that's open to everyone, and some of the rabbis, anyway, emphasized the halachic, or the legal aspects of Torah, as the way to commune with God and translate God's will into the realities of the present political and social structure of the Jewish community. Now, there's also an aspect of Talmud Torah that is very erotic. And many rabbis talk about wishing they had 2 mouths so that they could talk Torah all day long with one mouth, and then with the other mouth, when they needed to conduct their business affairs, their private affairs, their personal affairs, they would still have access to that. There's something about Talmud Torah, and I speak from personal experience here, having been in the yeshiva world for a few years in Jerusalem, in the world of Jewish seminary. There's something that's addicting and obsessive about it, where once you get into this mode, into this, not rut, but into this groove of studying Torah, you just want to keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it at the exclusion of all the other things that we should be doing, that rabbinic Judaism commands us to be doing. So we know that this was a problem for the early rabbis because so many rabbinic statements are dedicated to saying, don't neglect your other responsibilities. Well, they wouldn't need to say, don't neglect your other responsibilities unless people were neglecting their other responsibilities. So for instance, there's a statement in Pirkei Avot, which is part of the Mishnah. It's an appendix of the Mishnah, which we'll talk about in the next section, that says Talmud Torah should be combined with worldly concerns. And that someone that just does study, but doesn't translate that into practice, it's as if they have no God. Harsh words. The rabbis were very hyperbolic. They used exaggeration whenever they wrote agadic statements. Agadah. We talked about halakha as Jewish law. Agadah is everything else. Agadah literally means telling or recounting. And the agadic sections of rabbinic literature could deal with theology or folklores or magic, what we would call superstition, stories about the rabbis and the disciples. Anything that doesn't specifically have to do with the Jewish law is called Agadah. And in the Agadah, the rabbis were very freewheeling about, someone that just studies Torah and doesn't engage in worldly pursuits is as if they have no gods. All right? Very dramatic and bold in their language.